The yacht apex meridian carved a clean line through the dark water, a moving palace of glass and steel gliding over a restless sea. Far from any coastline, wrapped in expensive silence and the low hum of engines, it felt less like a vessel and more like a floating boardroom, a place where decisions were made that reshaped maps and ruined lives. Adrian Locke stood at the bow, the wind tugging at his tailored suit, just enough to remind him that nature still existed outside climate control and polished marble. The sea around him was ink, disturbed only by the foaming wake and the soft shimmer of the yacht's lights reflected on the surface. Behind him, a wall of tinted glass hid a world of leather chairs, rare whiskey, and screens filled with numbers. That was the world he trusted. His phone was pressed to his ear, but his attention was on the horizon, eyes narrowed, as if the darkness ahead were simply another market to be conquered. He listened without expression, while a nervous voice on the other end tried to explain a delay. The bank had hesitations. The local families were resisting. There were protests about heritage and burial grounds and generations of memories. Adrian spoke calmly, his tone precise and stripped of sympathy. He reminded the caller that the foreclosure had been processed, that the contracts were clean, that the Royal Crescent Resort project had a rigid timeline, and investors who did not care about sentimental stories told in kitchens with peeling paint. A house was not a sanctuary in his language. It was an entry on a balance sheet, a line that could be shifted from one column to another. When the call ended, he did not linger on any detail of the conversation. For him, there was only the outcome: assets acquired, schedule maintained, obstacles removed. He slipped the phone into his pocket, lifting a glass of champagne from the tray a steward presented with a quiet nod. The bubbles rose in a steady stream, like a graph trending upward, just as they were supposed to. Inside the main salon, the atmosphere was celebratory. Soft music floated through the air, and the big screen on the wall displayed a digital model of Royal Crescent Resort. All white curves and turquoise pools lay gently over what had once been a fishing village. Investors and associates lounged in low chairs, trading jokes and forecasts, already spending profits that only existed in projections. Victor Hale approached Adrian with the familiar ease of a long-term partner. He carried another bottle of vintage champagne, the label discreet and expensive. Victor had the relaxed charm of a man who preferred to let others underestimate him. His laugh was a little too loud, his friendliness a little too practiced, but he had made a career out of turning that performance into power. He lifted his glass toward the screen where the digital resort gleamed. He spoke of the decades-defining acquisition, of beachfront land converted into pure value, of the way Royal Crescent would cement their company at the top of every industry list that mattered. Around them, the others smiled and nodded, basking in reflected ambition. Adrian's agreement was simple and almost bored. To him, the project was not a dream but a sum. Land, labor, legal fees, marketing, projected occupancy. All of it reduced to columns he could audit in his head. The sea, the village, the families, the graves, none of that appeared on his internal ledger. The only tide that mattered was the one that moved capital from risk to return. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying a faint tang of salt and something heavier, a hint of an approaching storm far beyond the range of radar. Adrian did not notice. He lifted the glass to his lips, eyes returning to the glowing rendering of Royal Crescent, already calculating the next acquisition that would follow once this one was complete. The celebration in the salon thinned as the night stretched on, leaving only a few voices murmuring over the soft music. Victor Hale remained close to Adrian's side, refilling drinks with the precision of a host who understood timing as well as he understood ambition. To the untrained eye, he looked like a man honoring a victory shared equally between partners. But beneath the charm, his gaze lingered too long, calculating distances and outcomes invisible to everyone except himself. Adrian stood near the panoramic windows, watching the sea shift under the moonlight. He felt the faint warmth of the champagne spreading through his veins, slower than usual, duller somehow. He dismissed it at first as fatigue from weeks of negotiations. Victor had insisted he take a break, had arranged this offshore retreat to celebrate their progress and finalize the list of properties for the next quarter. A practical gesture, a useful one. Victor joined him at the window, swirling his drink. "You should savor this," he said lightly. "Royal Crescent will set a new benchmark. 10 years from now, people will say this was the moment everything changed." Adrian nodded, his thoughts already drifting to the next expansion phase. He had no interest in nostalgia, only in forward motion. Yet something in Victor's tone flickered oddly, a current beneath the surface. Adrian tried to focus, but a slow weight tugged at his eyelids. His fingers tingled faintly. He looked down at the champagne glass in his hand, then back at Victor. The room blurred at the edges, shapes softening like wet paint running down a canvas. Adrian straightened, instinct tightening, awareness sharpening through the haze. His voice came out low and controlled. "What did you give me?" Victor's smile was almost sympathetic. "Not enough to kill you, not directly." It was the kind of smile that preceded irreversible decisions, the kind that belonged to men who believed they were acting for the greater good, even when the greater good was only for themselves. "You were going to ruin it," Victor said, his voice soft but steady. "You have become hesitant." Soft. Talking about community councils and environmental concessions as if they mattered. "Investors want results, not sentiment. And I will not let your conscience or your anxiety derail what we built." Adrian tried to step back, but his legs buckled. Victor caught his arm as though helping an unsteady friend, even as the toxin in the champagne dissolved the line between effort and surrender. Through the window, the sea had turned darker, rising and falling in slow, heaving breaths. Victor's grip tightened. The company needs someone decisive, someone unafraid to make the sacrifices you refuse to make. You once believed in that yourself. Then you started doubting everything. The families, the protests, the little stories of hardship. You began to hesitate, and hesitation is fatal at our level. The words drifted around Adrian like echoes crossing water. The world tilted as Victor guided him toward the aft deck, where the cold wind hit with the force of a slap. The night was vast and indifferent. Far below, the waves churned with quiet violence. Victor leaned close. "This is not murder. This is continuity. You will disappear, and the company will survive. The empire will not crumble because you grew a conscience." Adrian's fingers slipped against the railing. His vision fractured. The last thing he felt was Victor's hands releasing him, not with anger, but with certainty. Then the sea swallowed him whole. The sea was a living creature that night, restless and clawing, as if trying to tear itself apart. Wind slashed across the water in violent sweeps, bending waves into jagged silver ridges that crashed against one another with deafening force. Clouds hung low like bruises smeared across the sky, and lightning stitched brief, white scars into the darkness. Far from the luxury of the apex meridian, a modest fishing trawler battled the rising storm. Its wooden hull groaned, its lanterns flickered wildly, but it pressed on, guided by hands that had known this ocean since childhood. Mara Ellis stood at the helm, her jaw tight, her knuckles white around the cracked wooden wheel. Salt water stung her eyes, mixing with the rain that lashed across her face. She hated storms. They awakened memories she spent years burying. Memories of her mother's boat splintered on the rocks, of a helpless scream lost in the wind. She had been 12. The sea had taken her mother, and Mara had never forgiven it. But tonight, she pushed through every instinct urging her to turn back. Her father, Thomas, was securing the nets behind her, shouting orders that the storm drowned out. They needed to reach safer waters before the gale turned deadly. But something in the distance had pulled Mara off course. A flicker, a shape, a movement too deliberate to be debris. "There, starboard." She pointed, her voice sharp. Thomas strained his eyes through the rain. At first he saw nothing but the chaotic rise and fall of the waves. Then lightning split the sky, revealing a human form tossed helplessly like driftwood. For a moment, the silhouette vanished beneath the surface. Thomas swore, pushing past Mara to grab the boat hook. "Hold her steady. We have one chance." The wind fought her, trying to pry the wheel from her grip. Waves slammed the bow sideways. The trawler shuddered violently as she forced it toward the struggling figure. The ocean was a beast, and they were navigating straight into its jaws. Another flash of lightning illuminated the man. His face appeared pale and slack, dark hair plastered to his forehead, body half limp but twitching with the instinct to survive. Mara felt something tighten in her chest. He was drowning. She could not let the sea take someone else. Not tonight. Not again. Thomas leaned dangerously over the railing as the trawler surged. Now, Mara, bring me closer. She gritted her teeth, forcing the boat at an angle that risked capsizing. Water washed over the deck, soaking her legs. Thomas reached out with the boat hook, hooked it under the man's arm, and strained with a grunt. For a terrifying second, the man slipped free. Then Mara threw her weight against the wheel, correcting just enough for Thomas to haul the unconscious stranger over the side. He collapsed onto the deck with a wet thud, water streaming from his clothes. His chest rose only faintly. Mara dropped to her knees beside him, brushing aside the drenched hair clinging to his face. His skin was cold as stone. "He's alive," Thomas said, breathless, but barely. Mara placed a trembling hand over the man's sternum. She felt the fragile flutter of a heartbeat and a surge of determination steadier than the storm. "Help me get him below," she said. "If we do nothing, he will die." Outside, the storm raged with renewed fury. But inside the small cabin, Mara knelt beside the stranger, refusing to let the ocean claim him the way it had claimed so much of her past. The storm eased only enough to make movement possible. The fishing trawler rocked hard in the swelling waves as Mara and her father carried the unconscious stranger into the narrow cabin beneath the deck. Lantern light swung in wide arcs, casting rapid shadows that made the space feel both intimate and fragile. They laid the man on a small cot, covered with a wool blanket patched more times than Mara could count. Water pooled beneath him, dripping steadily from his clothes and hair. His breathing was shallow, his lips tinged with blue, and his pulse fluttered in a way that worried her. Thomas knelt beside her, assessing the stranger with the blunt practicality earned from decades at sea. He took in the man's expensive watch, the fine stitching of his soaked shirt, the faint scent of cologne clinging stubbornly beneath the layers of salt. Not a fisherman, not a tourist, not from any nearby vessel. "Whoever he is," Thomas muttered, "he does not belong out here." Mara ignored the comment and pressed her palm to the man's forehead. He was burning beneath the cold, the kind of conflicting temperature that suggested shock. She moved quickly, stripping away his wet shirt and wrapping his torso in dry cloth. Her hands were steady, but her mind raced. The sea had thrown this stranger at her feet, half dead and nameless. The man stirred, his eyes flickering open for a brief second. His gaze was unfocused, drifting past her face to the lantern above. His lips parted. A faint sound slipped out. "Phone. Need my phone." Mara leaned closer. "There is no signal out here. You need to lie still." He tried to push himself up, but his muscles trembled violently. The toxin Victor had slipped into his drink, still clouding his mobility and thoughts. Mara placed a firm hand on his shoulder, and he fell back with a quiet groan. Thomas stepped out to stabilize the boat, leaving Mara and the stranger alone in the cramped cabin. She studied him in the flickering light. His features were sharp, aristocratic even, but there was something else, a brittleness beneath the surface, something that did not match the powerful, wealthy image suggested by his clothes. The man tried again to form words. "My name is—" His voice broke off, a rasp swallowed by exhaustion. He blinked slowly, eyelids heavy, as though even remembering himself required too much effort. Mara touched his wrist, checking his pulse again. "Save your strength. You can tell us when you wake." Her father returned, brushing rain from his beard. "The storm is pushing us off course. We need to stay near the lee side of the island." Mara nodded without taking her eyes off the stranger. "We will take him home, at least until morning." Thomas arched a brow. "You think bringing trouble ashore is a good idea?" Mara's reply was quiet but unyielding. "The sea tried to take him. I will not let it finish the job." Her father did not argue. He knew that tone. It was the same one the night she insisted on searching for her mother, long after hope had vanished. As the trawler finally slipped into calmer water, Mara gently adjusted the blanket over the stranger and studied his face. He had offered no name, no truth to anchor him. Only desperation and fragments of panic. Until he spoke clearly, until he chose to explain himself, she would call him what he was now. A man without a name, delivered by a storm, Mara had once feared and now refused to bow to. Morning arrived slowly, filtering into the cabin through slits in the wooden shutters. The storm had passed, leaving the air rinsed clean and salt sharp. The kind of morning that always made the island feel like a world apart. Mara had barely slept. She remained by the stranger's side for hours, changing the cool cloth on his forehead, checking his breathing, watching color return faintly to his cheeks. When she finally stepped outside, the sun was rising behind the ridge, casting a warm shimmer across the harbor. Her father had already moored the trawler and gone ahead to speak with Elder Ruth, the village matriarch, leaving Mara to guide the stranger alone. She kept him wrapped in one of her thick coats as she helped him off the boat. His steps were uncertain, his balance unsteady, but he insisted on walking. They crossed the narrow wooden pier, moving toward a cluster of small houses nestled against the cliffside. The village was modest, built from weathered planks and painted in soft hues of blue and green, as if the entire place had been carved out of the sea itself. Children raced between the homes, laughing freely, while fishermen prepared their nets for the next tide. The stranger moved silently, taking in every detail. He breathed like someone unused to air that did not smell of fuel or industrial polish. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Oak Haven Isle," Mara replied. 2 hours from the mainland, depending on the weather. No resorts, no high-rises, no nightlife, just us. He nodded slowly. His eyes lingered on the simplicity of the place, as if trying to reconcile it with some internal map of the world. Mara guided him along a dirt path that led to a larger structure, built from driftwood and corrugated metal. Children sat on benches outside, clutching battered notebooks, their faces expectant. When they saw Mara, they waved and called her name. "You teach them?" he asked. She shrugged. "Someone has to. School closed last year. They sent one teacher from the mainland once a week, but she never stayed long. So now the island teaches itself." She stepped inside, setting down the basket she carried. Chalk drawings covered the walls, oceans, constellations, simple arithmetic, fragments of stories written in uneven handwriting. The room was warm, bright, alive with the quiet energy of learning. The stranger watched her move among the students, handing out books, adjusting a boy's collar, tying a little girl's shoelace with practiced ease. Every gesture was gentle and deliberate. This was her world, her purpose. When the class settled, she glanced at him. "You can sit in the back if you want, until your strength returns." He hesitated, then obeyed. It was not the sort of environment he understood. There were no sleek conference tables, no numbers scrolling across screens, no subordinates waiting on his approval, only children who trusted Mara's voice more than the tide. As she began the lesson, reading aloud from a worn copy of an old adventure novel, the children leaned closer, hanging on every word. Her voice seemed to fill the entire room, soft yet commanding, carrying a warmth he had not felt in years. He watched her move, watched how the children's eyes lit up, how the room seemed to breathe differently when she read. It unsettled him, not because he disliked it, but because it stirred something unfamiliar. During a break, she approached him. Her gaze was direct, steady. "I do not know who you are or why the sea brought you here, but as long as you stay, you contribute, no exceptions." He answered with a faint, tired smile. "What do you need from me?" She pointed to the roof. "Rain leaks through during storms. We start with that." It was the first time in years that anyone had assigned Adrian Locke a task without calculation, without negotiation, without recognizing his value as currency. And it was the first time in longer still that he found himself unable to refuse. The day slipped into late afternoon with a deceptive calm, the air thick with that eerie stillness islanders instinctively recognized as a warning. Adrian had been working for hours beside Mara on the weathered roof of the shed behind the school, his hands clumsy on the tools, but determined in a way she found both frustrating and oddly admirable. Clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark and heavy, rolling toward the island like a tide of iron. Mara glanced up every few minutes, sensing the coming squall long before Adrian noticed anything amiss. "You need to hurry," she said, tightening the last rope on a tarpaulin. "Storms come fast here, they do not negotiate." He smirked faintly, wiping sweat and dust from his brow. "You forget I spend most of my life negotiating." "Then this will be your greatest challenge yet." She tried not to smile, but the edges of her lips betrayed her. He caught it, and a flicker of warmth stirred between them, instinctive and unspoken. The first wind hit suddenly, hard enough to rattle the wooden beams overhead. Adrian stiffened, looking toward the sea as the horizon vanished behind a wall of rain. The temperature dropped rapidly. Mara grabbed the remaining tools and tossed them into a crate. Inside, now. The storm did not wait for consent. Sheets of rain hammered the roof, and lightning cracked open the sky as they ducked into the small fishing shack nearby. The door slammed behind them, shutting out the chaos but trapping the weight of the storm inside. Inside the dim structure, shadows clung to the corners, illuminated only by brief flashes of lightning through the gaps in the walls. The air was thick with the scent of wet rope, salt, and the clean, warm eucalyptus oil Mara used after long days on the sea. Adrian stood near the door, his breath sharp and uneven. Mara noticed the tremor in his hands before he did. "You're afraid," she said softly. His jaw tightened. "It's not the storm." She waited. He didn't speak. His breathing grew faster, pressed tight with a panic he could not hide. A memory crashed over him, the cold water closing over his face, his muscles failing, the darkness swallowing him. His voice cracked. "I can still feel the sea taking me." Mara stepped closer, placing a steadying hand on his arm. Her touch grounded him instantly. "This shack has stood through storms far worse than this. You are safe." Another flash of lightning lit her face, drawing his eyes to her. The intensity of the moment eclipsed everything else. The storm outside, the danger, the fear lodged inside his chest. Adrian's breath hitched. She was close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin, the faint scent of chamomile from her hair, the strength in her presence. "Mara," he whispered, barely audible. Her eyes lifted to meet his. The storm roared around them, but the world narrowed to a single charged point between them. The space between their bodies closed slowly, drawn by something neither could deny. His hand rose, almost hesitantly, brushing a damp strand of hair from her cheek. Her breath caught, her pulse quickened. Every boundary they had maintained strained under the weight of the moment. But just as the pull became irresistible, Mara lifted a trembling hand and pressed it gently to his chest, stopping him. "Not like this," she whispered, "not because of fear." The air between them throbbed with a longing neither dared voice. The storm raged on, shaking the walls, but the silence inside the shack was louder. And when the worst of the rain finally eased, neither of them walked out unchanged. The storm rolled out to sea by dawn, leaving the island washed clean and glittering under a pale morning sun. But inside Mara's chest, the air had not cleared. Something heavy and unspoken lingered between her and Adrian, pressing on every moment they shared. They returned to their tasks with forced normalcy, their hands moving through familiar motions as if habit alone could quiet the memory of almost crossing a line the night before. Mara stacked crates near the docks, her movements brisk and practiced. Adrian helped her father inspect the trawler's small engine, though his mind drifted constantly toward the woman who now avoided meeting his gaze. Every time their paths crossed, the air tightened. Their hands would brush accidentally, sending silent jolts neither acknowledged. By mid-morning, the docks were alive with activity. Fishermen untangled nets still damp from the storm, children chased each other along the narrow walkways, and villagers shared stories about the night's damage. It should have been comforting, but tension clung to Adrian like a second skin. While handing Mara's father a wrench, he finally asked what had been gnawing at him. "Is this normal for you all? Hiding from storms in makeshift sheds with holes in the walls?" Mara's father chuckled. "We handle what the sea gives. She teaches you if you listen." Adrian looked toward the horizon, uncomfortable with how much listening he had been forced to do in the past days. He had always shaped the world, not adapted to it. Mara approached then, carrying a basket of spare rope. The way she held herself was subtly different today, guarded, and Adrian felt the shift like a door closing. "You should rest," she said quietly when she came near. "You barely slept." "So did you," he answered before he could stop himself. Her eyes flicked to him, sharp and warning. "Do not read into last night. The storm affects people, makes them feel things that aren't real." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "What I felt was real." She swallowed, her composure faltering for a heartbeat, but then she drew a long breath and looked away. "Real or not, it cannot matter. You are leaving as soon as we find a boat to take you out." The word struck him harder than he expected, and for a moment he felt the familiar instinct to shut down, retreat behind control and calculation. But the island had stripped him raw, and Mara's honesty left him standing exposed. Before he could respond, a desperate cry cut through the village. Elena rushed down the dock, clutching a small wooden box and a wrinkled sheet of paper, her face streaked with hot tears. Mara reached her instantly, wrapping her arms around the trembling woman. "What happened, Elena?" "They came this morning," Elena choked out. "Officers from the mainland. They said I had to be out by sunset. They said the land was seized." Mara took the document, scanning it quickly, her jaw tightened. "This is another forced acquisition. They are escalating." Adrian's stomach dropped. He knew that language. He knew the signatures, the formatting, the legal phrasing, meant to frighten people into surrendering their homes. His blood ran cold. Elena sobbed uncontrollably. "Where will I go? My grandparents built that house with their bare hands." Mara held her, fury simmering beneath her calm. "We will fight this. We will contest it. You are not alone." But Adrian could barely breathe. The Winslow Holdings seal glared up at him from the legal notice like a brand. His company, his empire, his signature, digitized and forged, looming over a woman's stolen home. He felt the fracture inside him widen. The island wasn't just teaching him something, it was indicting him. Mara turned to him then, unaware of the storm gathering behind his eyes. "You see, Adrian, these people are losing everything. That company out there is a monster." He wasn't sure whether the sick feeling in his chest was guilt or the terrifying knowledge that she was speaking about him. But in that moment, he understood one thing clearly. He could not leave the island yet, not until he faced the monster he had helped create. The truth pressed against Adrian's ribs like a tightening vice. All day he moved through Oakhaven Isle with a hollow chest, unable to escape the jagged knowledge that the suffering he witnessed was the direct consequence of the empire he had built. Every smile from a villager, every gesture of trust from Mara felt like a blade. By late afternoon, Annie invited him to her family's weekly communal dinner. The entire island gathered around long wooden tables under strings of lanterns. The scent of roasted fish, fresh bread, and lemon herbs filled the air. Children ran barefoot between the benches. Elders offered him warm nods. The kindness was suffocating. Mara sat beside him, quieter than usual, still guarded after the storm. But her nearness filled him with an ache so overwhelming that he could barely taste the food. Her father entertained the table with stories of tempests and rescues, drawing laughter from every corner. Adrian forced smiles, forced nods, but his mind churned relentlessly. These were the people his partner sought to erase. These were the people who would spit on his name if they knew the truth. After dinner, Mara brought out an old photo album. She pointed to childhood pictures, her first boat ride, the tiny one-room school she built from driftwood scraps before leaving for college, her grandmother teaching her to mend nets. Adrian watched with a painful admiration. Every image was a testament to a life anchored in community, heritage, and grit. And he, unknowingly, had threatened it all. As the night wound down, he wandered outside to the porch overlooking the sea. The moonlight shimmered across the water, painting silver ripples that reminded him of the night he had almost died. He gripped the railing to steady himself. He could no longer hide. He needed to face the storm he had created. Footsteps approached softly behind him. Mara. She stood beside him, her expression unreadable. "What do you see when you look out there?" "A man who thought he understood value," he answered softly. "And a man who was very wrong." Her gaze softened, but only for a breath. The guardedness returned, a shield he had placed there himself. Before she could speak, a shout echoed from the shoreline. Mr. Silas, the fisherman from the neighboring cove, trudged toward them, waving a newspaper. "Just returned from the city," he called. "Brought something you ought to see." Mara stepped forward before Adrian could react. She unfolded the paper. Her eyes caught the headline instantly. "Adrian Locke, billionaire real estate mogul, missing, presumed dead after maritime incident." Her world froze. She looked up slowly, her face white as sea foam. Her eyes slid to Adrian, connecting the impossible dots. The expensive clothes, the evasive answers, the desperation, the secrecy, the near kiss, the man she had trusted, the man she had almost fallen for. Her voice trembled like a live wire. "What is your name?" He swallowed. The lie dissolved on his tongue. Adrian Locke. The name struck her like a tidal wave, the name printed on the acquisition papers, the name whispered in every island meeting, the name cursed by families losing their homes, a name she had fought against for years. She stepped back. Pain twisted through her features, sharp and devastating. "All this time, you were the one we feared most, and you slept under my roof, ate at my table. Let me trust the man who was destroying us." Adrian's voice broke. "Mara, please. I didn't know. I never approved those methods. Mark. Do not speak to me about Mark. This is your company, your signature, your empire." Her tears glistened in the moonlight, but her voice was steel. "You are the monster we have been fighting." He reached for her. She recoiled as if burned. "Do not touch me." He had faced hostile investors, courtroom predators, lethal competitors. Nothing had ever frightened him like the look in her eyes now. A betrayal so deep it left the night itself trembling. And in that shattering moment, Adrian felt everything he had built, fortune, power, identity, collapse beneath the weight of a single truth. She would never forgive him. Unless he tore down the empire that had brought him here. Silence hung between them like a drawn blade. Mara stood rigid in the doorway of the cabin, the newspaper clenched in her shaking hand. Adrian remained frozen across the room, unable to breathe, unable to look away from the devastation carved into her expression. Mara's voice trembled, but her anger sharpened every word. "You came here pretending to be a victim, pretending to need shelter, pretending to care about my people, about me." Her voice cracked on the last word, and it was that break, not the accusations, that tore him apart. Adrian stepped forward, his voice raw. "Mara, I swear I didn't know what Mark was doing. I didn't know the acquisitions were illegal. I didn't know people were being threatened." She laughed, a sound so bitter it scraped the air. "You didn't know. The billionaire CEO who signs off on every major project. The man whose company sends officers to evict grandmothers from their homes. The man whose signature is on every notice." She threw the paper onto the table with a violent crack. "You were studying us, learning about the resistance, figuring out how to break us faster. And all the while Her voice faltered. Pain replaced fury. "I let myself trust you." Adrian bowed his head, guilt crushing him. "Mara, what I told you was true. Mark tried to kill me. He forged signatures. He built shell companies behind my back. He used the chaos of my disappearance to push through the resort by any means necessary. I didn't approve this. I didn't." She stepped closer, fierce and trembling. "You want me to believe that the man who built an empire didn't know his partner was destroying entire communities in his name?" He forced himself to meet her eyes. "Because I didn't look. Because I cared more about numbers than people. Because I thought success meant never slowing down long enough to see who got hurt." The truth fell from him like broken glass, each shard slicing deeper. I didn't know because I didn't want to know, and that is the worst part of this. Silence swelled, thick and suffocating. He drew a slow breath, steadying himself. But I am done being blind. I am going back to the city. I am taking back my company, and I will dismantle everything Mark has done. Every acquisition, every forged contract, every threat. Mara crossed her arms, eyes cold. And why should I believe any of this? He didn't plead. He didn't reach for her. He simply spoke the only truth he had left. You shouldn't, not yet, but I will prove it. He reached into his pocket and placed a torn scrap of paper on the table between them. Mara glanced at it, but didn't pick it up. This is not a plea, not a promise of love, not an apology that fixes nothing. Adrian's voice steadied. It is a contract of honor. He wrote quickly, each word etched with absolute clarity. I will return every home to its rightful owner. I will expose Mark Caldwell's fraud. I will protect this island from any future development. I will do it even if it costs me everything I built. He signed it with the same name she had learned to hate. Adrian Locke. Then he stepped back. I need to leave now, before Mark realizes I'm alive and tightens his control. Your father is the only one who can get me to the mainland without alerting him. Mara stared at him with a storm of emotions, rage, grief, a sliver of unwanted hope. You are asking me for trust you do not deserve, she whispered. I know. But Mark will win if I stay here. If he wins, this island is gone. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, Mara turned away. I will speak to my father, not for you, for Elena, for all of us. Adrian's chest tightened. It was more than he deserved. When the boat pulled away from the dock at dawn, Mara stood unmoving, refusing to wave, refusing to speak. She looked carved from the same stone as the cliffs, unyielding, beautiful, unreachable. Only when the vessel disappeared behind the curve of the cove did she find the scrap of paper he left behind. She unfolded it with trembling hands. His final line stopped her breath. I am not asking for forgiveness, only patience. She pressed the note to her heart, the hurt still fresh, but something else bloomed beneath it, a fragile, unwanted hope that the man who broke her trust might be the only one capable of saving everything she loved. The city felt obscenely loud after the silent dignity of Oakhaven Isle. Adrian stepped off the discreet transport boat and disappeared into the maze of concrete and steel, like a ghost returning to a world that believed him dead. His body still carried the scent of salt and smoke from the island, but here the air was laced with exhaust, ambition, and the sharp edge of betrayal. He moved quickly, slipping into the fortified safehouse he kept for emergencies. For 48 hours he worked without rest, piecing together every hidden thread Mark Caldwell had woven into the company. Bank statements, falsified acquisition orders, bribery paths, shell corporations, offshore transactions. Each discovery was a knife twisting deeper into him. Mark had not just tried to steal the company, he had weaponized it. The Royal Bay Resort was the crown jewel of an empire Adrian now realized he no longer recognized. The documents on his screen showed entire communities threatened, including Oakhaven Isle. Elena's eviction notice was not an anomaly, it was a strategy. Adrian's jaw tightened. His name had been stamped onto the suffering of people who trusted each other more than any contract. People who taught their children under patched roofs. People who shared food before profit. People who believed in Mara. He had been blind. Now he was furious. On the third morning, as the sun broke over the skyline, Adrian walked into the headquarters of Locke Global Properties wearing a simple dark suit. It was the first time in his life he felt like an intruder in his own empire. People stared, some gasped, others whispered. To them, he was a man risen from the dead. Mark Caldwell was in the middle of an emergency board meeting, papers spread before him, pen poised to sign the final declaration granting him full control. He looked smug, settled, victorious. Until the doors burst open. Adrian Locke stepped into the boardroom. Silence detonated like an explosion. Board members rose in shock. Mark's face drained of color. Adrian spoke with the controlled calm of a man who had burned down his illusions and found purpose in the ashes. I am alive, and I am here to reclaim what is mine. Mark attempted a smile that came out as a tremor. Adrian, my God, this is incredible. How did you? Adrian cut him off, sliding a folder onto the polished table with the cold precision of a scalpel. Toxicology reports, shipping logs, signed purchase orders for the muscle relaxant found in my bloodstream. You attempted to murder me, Mark. The evidence is overwhelming. Gasps rippled around the room. Mark tried to object, but Adrian wasn't finished. He opened another folder. The acquisitions, the forged signatures, the illegal evictions, the fraudulent shell companies, the systematic destruction of Oakhaven Isle under my name. Murmurs turned to outrage. Board members whispered accusations. Mark staggered under the weight of the exposed crimes. Adrian leaned forward, his voice a quiet blade. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed every principle this company pretended to stand for. Security entered the room at the board's command. Mark was removed, shouting desperate denials that no one believed. Adrian stood at the head of the table, shoulders heavy with the responsibility he had reclaimed. He had won. But winning meant nothing if he did not fulfill the contract he'd left in Mara's trembling hands. He went straight to his office and began the most painful part: undoing the destruction, one signature at a time. He returned every property seized by Mark. He absolved all debts. He dissolved the fraudulent subsidiaries. He halted the Royal Bay Resort permanently. Then came his largest act. He signed the declaration protecting Oakhaven Isle and its surrounding waters as a national treasure, preventing any corporation, including his own, from ever developing it again. The company lost billions. The board reeled. But Adrian felt something he had not felt in years: peace. Yet as he stared out the window at the city he had reclaimed, he felt the hollowness. He had redeemed his name, saved the community, destroyed the empire he once worshipped. But the one person whose belief mattered most had not yet seen the man he had become. He had fought the corporate war. Now came the war for his heart. Weeks passed in a blur of headlines and corporate earthquakes. Adrian Locke, once the symbol of untouchable wealth, had become the architect of an unprecedented corporate self-dismantling. Journalists speculated wildly. Investors panicked. Analysts called him unstable, idealistic, dangerous. But Adrian did not care. Every morning he woke with the same singular purpose: to honor the contract he had written with his own hand, to restore what had been stolen, to protect what had been threatened, and to prove to a woman who no longer trusted him that the man she saved from the sea was not an illusion. He returned every home. He absolved every debt. He transformed his company from a predatory empire into a vessel for restitution. Yet none of it eased the ache that anchored itself in his chest. He called Mara again and again. Her silence was absolute. A wall he had built with his lies and now had no right to breach. He poured millions into the Winslow Community Fund, building a modern school, repairing docks, restoring fisheries, installing solar grids, funding healthcare runs. The island flourished. It grew brighter, safer, more resilient than ever before. But Mara remained unreachable. On the morning he finally decided to go to her, he stood in front of the mirror in his penthouse and barely recognized the man staring back. He wore no tailored suit, no polished cufflinks, no gleaming watch, just a simple shirt, sleeves rolled, and canvas trousers worn from long days personally overseeing projects meant for Oakhaven, not shareholders. There was no arrogance left, no armor, just purpose. He booked a private seaplane with no entourage, no announcement. When the pilot circled the island, the sight stole his breath. Oakhaven Isle glowed in the afternoon sun, vibrant and whole in a way it had never been before. The school roof shone with new metal panels. The fishing docks bustled with renewed life. Families walked freely without fear of eviction. Laughter carried on the wind. He had saved this place. But saving a place was not the same as mending a heart. The plane glided onto the water, skimming across the gentle swells. Adrian stepped out alone, letting the pilot depart immediately. He wanted no grand entrance, no advantage. He wanted only the truth of whatever Mara chose. She was standing on the beach, sketchbook in hand, the wind brushing strands of her hair across her face. She froze the moment she saw him, her breath caught. Her fingers went still on the page. For a long moment, they only looked at each other, the distance between them thick with everything unspoken. Adrian remained where he was, feet planted in the sand, making no move forward. He would not cross a line that was no longer his to cross. If she wanted him gone, he would leave quietly. Mara's eyes flickered with a storm he could not read. Anger, disbelief, longing, grief, love, all tangled into one impossible knot. He swallowed, his voice steady but soft. I didn't come to ask for anything, not forgiveness, not trust. I came because I kept my word, and because I couldn't stay away any longer. She closed her sketchbook slowly, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. I know what you did, she whispered. The homes, the fund, the reserve, the school, everything. Adrian nodded once. It was your island before it was ever my responsibility. I just corrected what I allowed to go wrong. A silence stretched between them like a held breath. Then Mara took a step forward, then another, and another, until she was standing right in front of him, close enough to touch, yet still holding the last inch of caution between them. Her voice cracked. You destroyed everything you built. For us. For what's right, he corrected gently. And for you, yes. Her eyes filled. She looked at him as if seeing him for the first time, and seeing the man he had become because of her. The last inch between them evaporated. She moved first. She crashed into his chest with a soft, broken sound, her arms wrapping around him with all the force of someone who had been holding back too long. Adrian exhaled, burying his face in her hair, his arms clutching her like a lifeline. You came back, she whispered. Adrian held her tighter. I promised. In that moment, the island was not simply restored, so was he. 2 years later, Oakhaven Isle shimmered with a vibrancy that would have been unimaginable in the days when corporate threats loomed like storm clouds. The island was still humble, still made of weathered wood and wind-swept cliffs, but the fear that once clung to its shores had long since dissolved. In its place bloomed a thriving community bound by purpose, tradition, and hope. The Winslow Community School stood at the heart of the village, its bright windows open to the sea breeze. Laughter spilled through the halls each morning as children rushed into classrooms equipped with books, tablets, maps, and tools that connected them to a world beyond the waves. Mara, now principal and teacher, moved through the halls with the easy confidence of someone who had carved her own destiny from adversity. Her students adored her. The island trusted her. Outside, fishermen mended nets strengthened by new sustainable designs. Solar panels lined the rooftops, catching the generous island's sun. Projects funded by the Community Foundation had created new jobs, revived old crafts, and brought tourists eager to experience the island's protected natural wonders instead of exploiting them. And at the center of it all was Adrian Locke, no longer the cold architect of a predatory empire, but a man remade by humility and love. This afternoon, he was on his knees in the grass, wearing a faded linen shirt now smudged with frosting. Lily, his daughter with Mara, clapped her tiny hands and squealed as he attempted to stack wooden blocks into a tower that immediately toppled over. Her laughter rang through the air like a bell. He caught her up in his arms, spinning her gently as she giggled into his shoulder. Mara watched them from the porch, her heart full. The man who once measured life in profits now measured it in the milestones of their daughter's growth, in community gatherings, in quiet evenings spent reading by lamplight. Adrian had traded skyscrapers for sunsets, ambition for purpose, and the steel world of corporate dominance for the warm pulse of family. As twilight approached and guests began to depart from Lily's birthday celebration, Adrian took Mara's hand. "Come with me," he murmured. "There is something I want to show you." They walked hand in hand along a narrow path to the secluded cove where he had nearly drowned the night he was betrayed. The waves lapped gently at the shore, gilded by the last light of the setting sun. Here, everything had begun: his fall, his rescue, and ultimately, his transformation. Adrian paused, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out the old watch he had worn the night he fell from Mark's yacht. It was scratched, tarnished, and long since stopped ticking. He crouched and set it gently on the sand. "This used to define my life," he said quietly. "Every minute scheduled, every hour monetized, every second owned by something other than my own soul." Mara kneeled beside him. "And now this is just a relic," he replied. "My time belongs here, to you, to Lily, to this island, to the people who taught me that value is not something you build, but something you share." She rested her head on his shoulder. The wind carried the scent of the sea, the sound of distant laughter, and the steady rhythm of the tide. Adrian rose, pulling her into his arms. "Do you remember when I told you I was celebrating the biggest deal of my life on the apex?" "How could I forget?" she chuckled softly. "You said it with so much certainty." He kissed her forehead. "I was wrong. The biggest deal of my life was the contract of honor we made together, and every day I wake up, I'm choosing to sign it again." She looked at him then, not as the billionaire who once nearly destroyed her home, but as the man who destroyed his own empire to save it. The man who rebuilt his life with purpose instead of profit. They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, sealing a promise forged not from wealth or power, but from love, sacrifice, and redemption. As they walked back toward the warm glow of their home, Lily's laughter echoed across the water. The island stood strong behind them, protected forever, flourishing under the legacy of two lives that had collided against all odds. Adrian Locke had once belonged to the world of steel and numbers. Now he belonged to Oakhaven Isle, to Mara, to their daughter, to the future they had built together. And for the first time in his life, he was truly, irrevocably home.